Hello, everybody, and welcome to LoR Brothers Call. It's a podcast about two brothers. It's like my brother, and me, except it's less funny, and there's only two of us. I'm Boulevard, and this is my real brother, Ryan Miles, who's decided to use his real name because he's not avoiding the IRS like I am.
Oh, you're still doing that? They haven't found you? I thought
Not
you
yet.
sorted that out. Okay, we're good. We
It's
won't talk about
tax
it anymore.
season. We're living dirty now.
Okay, that's understandable. So, like my brother has said, this is the LoR Brothers Call. We will be talking about everything Legends of Runeterra, or LoR, as it is affectionately abbreviated as. And I guess a good way to start this would be to kind of tell you who you are and why we should listen. Who we are and why you should listen to us. I guess you should go first because you are actually masters, and I'm still climbing through the scrub ranks, as it were.
So I hit Masters today, so I got to say that. But the background on me is I played Yu-Gi-Oh for a bunch of years, sucked at it, switched to Force of Will a couple of years ago, won a World Championship, won a Masters qualifier, which got me a bunch of money, and now I'm just sitting filthy rich on card game money, and that qualifies me to talk about card games in some capacity.
I won Worlds for Forcible this year. I've topped the YCS for Yu-Gi-Oh! About 10 years ago, which is actually 10 years ago. So I've been playing card games for way too long. Legends of Runeterra is by far the most interesting one that I've played recently. There's just a lot of interaction going on and a lot of different ways to outplay your opponent and a lot of mind games. And I think it's the most interactive digital card game that we have actually seen that is exclusively on a digital platform when you think about it that way. So that's me, that's him, and I think we're just going to get talking right to it because I have some serious problems about Rasa, the fearsome man that is just a 7-5 that kills two dudes. How do you feel about him?
You didn't read my Twitter thread, did you?
I've read maybe 10 of them out of 15.
So I put up a big Twitter thread last night kind of about my thoughts of what's going to change on the upcoming balance changes, and I focused a lot on Shadow Isle because I think that there are a lot of problem cards in there, and honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if Rasa doesn't get touched here.
Really? What makes you say that?
I think that there are so many problem cards, and they don't so the big thing is obviously, like, you and I also have some card game design background. We worked for a couple of games that I don't want to name currently, but I know that card game designers generally don't want to be super aggressive on the first couple of balance changes. It was a little bit different when you had the I guess I want to call them pre-beta weekends, and then you go into the next one and they changed like 20 cards over the course of a few months. We go to the next one, they changed another like 30 cards, and now we're in actual beta. I'm not sure how aggressive this team is going to be. I really wouldn't be surprised to see them want to start off kind of light and see where it goes. I'm not expecting another like 20 or 30 cards to change. And there are so many cards in Shadow Isle that I think currently present bigger problems to the diversity of the meta than Rasa the Sunderer. And while I think it's going to continue to be a strong card and one of the strongest Shadow Isle cards, I think it's definitely been outclassed in recent weeks by Hecarim, Rasa the Sun, or not Rasa, Commander Ladros, and the fearsome package as a whole. A couple of decks have even started to cut Rasa. Not a lot, but a couple, especially as they move more towards Mono Shadow Isle. Vengeance has started to come up in a big way, which kind of makes you want to cut down on the number of Rasa because you don't want to have too many late game cards, even if you are Mono Shadow Isle. There's a couple of different packages people have kind of filled out the decks with, and I think Rasa's just not it's not a 3 of in every Shadow Isle deck like it kind of was the first couple of days. And I mean, sure, worst case, it's a 7-5 fearsome, but nobody actually plays it as just a naked 7-5 fearsome. They're looking for value. It's a card that you can outplay in a couple of different ways. You can still deny the ability. You can, summon something in response with a discard spell into a Scrap Scuttler or Vile Feast.
I get what you're saying there, but I think that, like, just to kind of touch on some of the points you're talking about right now, like Shadow Isles is kind of just the end-all be-all class where, because you look at the top end, you look at Commander Ledros, you look at Rasa, you look at the Ruination, and you say, oh, well, Shadow Isles is supposed to be like a big control class, like it, and probably Freljord just have a lot of control elements, and then it accidentally is also the best aggro class because it has access to all the fearsome, like you're saying. And I definitely think that Rasa was probably my number one hated card in the first couple of weeks and has kind of not really been that over the most recent times. And I do agree that if I want to see changes next week, then like Rasa's maybe not the biggest priority. But I think that as we hedge some of the more egregious errors, I do think that like Rasa actually is just like standalone my biggest problem card, whereas the Mist Wraith, the Wraith Caller kind of are more problematic right now because they work in tandem with other things, because there are so many fearsome cards, because you have cards like Mark of the Isles, which gives +3/+3 for 1. When you have those other aggressive packages tacked onto it, that overwhelming synergy gets there. But if you just look at Rasa in a vacuum, that was kind of my biggest problem, where I think once you scope out that stuff, just like killing two dudes on a body that's a very sizable body just is kind of problematic to me in a way. But I'm not like married to the idea. I do think that Wraith Caller is probably the more egregious, like you're saying.
So I think the problem with Fearsome, or with Rasa rather, is that the only way that you're going to nerf it and people are going to be happy with it is by upping the cost. I think if you change its ability in any way, then you're fundamentally changing the identity of the card in too big of a way. If you just nerf its stats, I don't think people are actually happy with that. Like if we just knock him down to like a 6/5, I don't think anybody's going to be like, oh boy, Rasa's dead. It's, it's not 7 attack coming in my face, it's 6 attack instead. Because you're hard capped on that 20 life total, I think that they have kind of overloaded the stat line of some of the higher cost creatures. But I think that like you'd have to just up its cost. And I think upping the cost is how I want to deal with Ladros and Hecarim. And I think if you up the cost of Ladros, Hecarim, and Rasa, I think that's a little bit too much.
So what do you mean when you say you wanted to up the cost of, you say Ladros, I'm going to say Ledros because I am not ridiculous or whatever adjective you want to use to describe yourself. It's obviously Ledros. And then also Hecarim, like you think that Hecarim, I mean, pushing 10 damage on turn 6 is definitely a lot, especially when 4 of it has Overwhelm, and then he's just such a sizable body. Do you think that it would even be incorrect to just reduce Hecarim's health? Do you really think that the higher cost is what you want to do with that?
Absolutely. I think that you could make him a 4/1, and the card is almost fundamentally the same because it's in the same class as the Rekindler.
Right.
And the Rekindler is something that's picked up a lot of steam lately, and I think that you just need to like push back the Hecarim turns in order to make the mid game more survivable. Because the problem is that with Rasa and Ledros, Shadow Isle has a very kind of strong and rounded out late game, and then they have a very strong early game with all the fearsome stuff, and then like the mid game is where they should struggle, and that's where Hecarim slots in perfectly.
Right.
It's just like turn 6 is like my best turn in the game, where it should be one of my weakest based on like turn 5 and turn 6 should be Shadow Isle's weakest turns. That should be like my window as a different deck to kind of attack them, because 1 through 4 has got a great curve, 7-8 got a great curve, 5-6 should be where I'm able to attack them, and Rekindler on 6 doesn't feel as bad if like Hecarim doesn't come down. So I think if you push Hecarim to like 8 mana, then you're delaying when he comes out. You have a bit more tools in the late game to deal with him, such as like maybe your own Rasa, maybe Vengeance, something like that.
Are you suggesting that we keep the stat line the same too then?
I think if you push up the mana
4/6?
cost, you should keep the stat line the same. I think a 4/6 is fine.
Sure. I'm just looking at compare Hecarim, for example, to Anivia. Like, I feel like Anivia is a 3/5. Like, Anivia has that extra little bit where she constantly comes back all the time. And I think that does kind of really factor into how they balanced her. So she has to be definitely weaker. But I think, like, the survivability on Hecarim on top of just how much damage he's able to push and then how low he costs is definitely, like, a big problem, all things considered. But I don't hate the idea of keeping him on 6 because I do enjoy the idea of the interaction with him and the Rekindler. So I think like making the survivability more of an issue would be where I would attack that. If you're upping the cost, then you're just getting into like Shadow Isles already has a lot of hefty stuff, like you said. Even if you want to increase the cost of Commander Ledros, you've already got the Ruination up there. I think that even moving him to 10 and moving Hecarim to 8 just seems like a little bit too much, and I would just rather have an easier time killing him, which would then also synergize with Rekindler, because then you would actually want your Hecarim to die and not feel too bad about it. But that might even be too powerful.
I think you still get over-aggressed on, because like it's not really the health that's a problem. It's more like the attack and the amount of damage that he pushes out, and the fact that he gets to do it on attacks. So like if you go to end your turn, and then you're going to your opponent's turn 6 or 7, I guess, because they're playing Hecarim at the end of your turn. If you don't have the capabilities of dealing with it immediately, then I just get to attack with my Hecarim. Even if you block it and kill it, you're still eating like 8 or 9 damage, and then I just play Rekindler, and oh look, I have another Hecarim. You deal with that. I either play another Hecarim, another Rekindler. I play the what's the 4 mana 3/3 that kills a guy and revives it?
The Chronicler of Ruin.
Yeah, if I Chronicler of Ruin my Rekindler, like there's so many ways to just bring back Hecarim. I don't think making him more killable is what I want to see. I think I just want to see him coming out a bit later and making it harder to like chain together, Hecarims into Rekindlers and Chronicler of Ruins.
No, that makes sense. So, like, what else do you think? Because the Hecarim wasn't really a deck that was on the radar until I want to say around week 2 of our beta so far. It was really the elusive that came out of the gate, and I think that Fearsome has like very clearly overtaken it. Elusives, because they rely more on buffs and like playing cards to actually buff them, they're more vulnerable to removal, like Rasa, like Will of Ionia, like Vengeance even, or just like tempo plays where you actually are able to kill them before they can get the buff down and things like that. Challenger units, a lot of the Freljord Nox decks have been using challengers to not only beat elusive guys but also beat fearsomes in the same way. So what do you think? Like, you're masters now, but you've probably seen a lot of elusives like on the climb. Like, do you think that elusives are more of a problem, or that fearsome is more of a problem?
I think fearsome's more of a problem. It definitely has a better matchup across the board, and it has more plus ones. For
Hmm.
example, the only real plus one out of an elusive deck is going to be Shadow Assassin and the draw card, whereas Wraithcaller is just absolutely insane for 4 mana, the amount of stats that it puts on board, the amount of damage that it puts on board, and the amount of advantage that you can create out of it. Elusive doesn't have anything that compares to that.
Right. And then even
And
elusive decks don't splash Shadow Isles very well, whereas Shadow Isles splashes elusive or splashes Ionia very well. And then like when you look at the deck lists of Shadow Isles that are playing Wraithcaller and are going for very hefty allegiance, the cards that they're splashing are usually deny and then also the card draw, the Shadow Assassin. And I'm a big fan of actually playing Chronicler of Ruin in the Shadow Isles decks, not only for the Hecarim Rekindler stuff, but also just using it on a Wraithcaller, using it on a Shadow Assassin, just getting like those value enter abilities back again. I think that's insane. I think that card's just bonkers. And now when you have this aggressive deck that is putting a fearsome guy on turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, and then like on turn 5 can revive its Mistwraith if it really wants to, and then plays Hecarim on 6. Like it's just attacking from all angles, and then if it's Shadow Assassinating on 3, then its Chronicler can just be card draw. I just had a pop-up come up for Origin Installer, but I think all right, but yeah, that's like it definitely just feels like Shadow Isles are far and away the most oppressive class. But like, what happened to elusives where Shadow Isles took so long to come out of the woodwork?
I think Shadow Isle just kind of took a bit more getting used to. We didn't really realize how overloaded Fearsome was on lower statted bodies. Fearsome as a keyword is something that we've seen in a couple of other card games, most notably and recently in Magic the Gathering Questing Beast has a stat or has a keyword very similar to Fearsome. And I think I like the way that it was used in Questing Beast, where it's like I have this mid-level creature that can't get chump blocked. And they've just kind of put it on a lot of 2 and 3 drops to the point where it's like, well, this isn't like I can't get chump blocked. This is my early game is unblockable.
Well,
And
even looking back to when Pokrivak first got Masters out of anyone, he was playing the Noxian Spiders, and that
yeah,
didn't abuse the Mistwraith Wraithcaller, but it still played Noxious Pet or Precious Pet, which is just a 2/1 with Fearsome. And this aggressive deck was just playing Noxious Pet on 1, and then what's the name of the 3/2 spider? You know what I'm
I
talking
have
about?
no idea.
You don't
I
know
know what
card
you're
names?
talking about.
Yeah, it's another 3/2 fearsome spider, and you would just like you couldn't
It's arachnid horror.
arachnid horror. You would just you would
Yeah.
just not be able to. You would try to like build a control deck to like survive the early game, but then you would just take like 7 damage by turn 3 because they would hit you for 2 and then hit you for 5, and like you just didn't really play 3-power minions because people weren't on like that level yet.
Yeah, it's absolutely absurd to me that like in the fearsome deck, it is extremely possible for me to match you on curve and go like turn 1 I play a 1-drop, 2 I play the 3-drop, all the way to turn 3 I can play on curve perfectly and still eat 15 damage on turn 3
Yeah,
because all of my guys just had 2 attack or less,
and then
and I'm getting punished for like playing the game.
but then you look at the elusive dudes, and the elusive dudes are understated. You know, like your noxious, your precious pet is a 2/1 for 1, but then the Glade Leaf, the 2/1 that gets bigger every time you play another unit, that
It's
card's
2
a
mana.
2/1 for 2. I mean, it gets bigger, so there is definitely upside to it, and it usually
Well,
hits for more than 2. But like
they have a 1-mana 2/1. It's Navori something.
yeah, but it's only elusive for 1 turn, and then it's
Exactly. Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
a downside kind of.
yeah,
That's a big problem with the elusive decks is like you kind of have to manage how you're. I think it's kind of weird because like the elusive decks play things like Inspiring Mentor, and I love that there are decks that get to punish me for playing Inspiring Mentor. Like the Fearsome decks, it's like okay, well your Inspiring Mentor is actually just useless because it doesn't block anything that's fearsome, it doesn't block anything that's elusive. It's basically just a liability in your deck, and it's
hmm
actually kind of easy in the fearsome and elusive decks to just like let your opponent flood their board with things that can't block. And I think that I'm curious to see whether how the Runeterra design team is actually going to address the fearsome problem, because one of the things that they could do is just buff the attack on some minions across the board in other factions
hmm
in order to give them a better early game against fearsome.
Yeah, I think that's another big reason why the Frel Nox deck has popped up is because you've got a 3/1 for 2 that also has a NT aggro like freeze effect on enter. The Iceveil Archer, I believe it's called. Just like 3 attack minions have just been such a huge premium because you're looking for ways to steal fearsome. And overall, I don't even think that like fearsome is a better mechanic than elusive, because like yeah, they're a little bit weaker set at early, but then they have that mechanic at all stages of the game where eventually fearsome just kind of stops mattering, except for like in fringe scenarios kind of towards the late game, or just when you start drawing your weaker minions later on. Frenzied Skitterer I think is actually like the most problematic card in fearsome. I think that that card especially, you put these 3-attack minions, these cheap 3-attack minions in your deck so that you can avoid the fearsome guys, and then suddenly they play a Frenzied Skitter, your entire board now has 2-attack, and you just eat like 7 damage in the turn, and you're just like, well, I had a board to beat that, and Frenzied Skitter can't even be denied, so there's just actually nothing you can do. I don't think there's any card that just gives your board +1/+0. I don't even think that card exists, so it does. It does? What is it?
It's a Noxus card. It's 3 mana. Give your board +1/+0, but it also works if you discard.
Also, I think it costs 4 mana actually, so it's not even on card.
Pretty sure it's 3, but because I know if you discard it, it functions.
I know if you discard it functions, but I think that like makes it up the cost. But I'm not 100% sure. But yeah. But
Maybe.
It's in.
But I know that card does exist.
Yeah. But like any of the other elements or other factions that want to be playing defensively, they like 3 mana, 3 attack units are not defensive units. They're not control units, and it feels like with how between elusives and fearsome, it just feels like control has had a difficult time functioning. But then at the same time, like those units also have pretty low health lines, so it's pretty much exclusively Heimerdinger control has been or Piltover control, right? Either Heimerdinger or Ezreal have been the only control decks. We haven't seen the Freljord Shadow Isles that we saw a lot of in like the second wave of beta.
There's an Ionia Freljord deck that I believe hit Masters, where the idea was like, because I've seen it a few times, you still play the Wording Stones, you still play the Catalyst of Aeons, and you're a War Mother's Call deck.
Right.
Except I think the idea is to shuffle Karmas into your deck, and then you're just constantly hitting Karmas off War Mother's Call.
Oh, that's interesting.
I think that's the idea. I don't know if that's the exact version that hit Masters, but I have seen that deck a couple of times climbing through Diamond. So like it's still out there. People are playing it.
Okay. That's not something I've seen. I'm so hard pressed to. I guess War Mother's Call can resolve if you have an Enlightened Karma, because then they can't deny both War Mother's Call, and then if you resolve 2, it just gets kind of weird, I suppose.
A lot of them haven't been playing Karma though, so I've just been hard bodying them, but with deny when they try to play War Mother's Call.
How are they shuffling copies of Karma into their deck if they're Ionia Freljord? What card does that? I don't.
Oh, you're right. Maybe they're not.
Yeah, I'm like,
what the hell was I thinking of?
Only Piltover shuffles, so.
I could maybe I'm just wrong. Maybe that's why, because like some of the ones that I've seen have just been playing like Anivia Tryndamere again. So
yeah, no, it would have to be. But and then
I guess they're just straight up War Mother's Call decks that just don't function when denies in the format, which is it's actually something that is phased out of the fearsome decks a little bit as deny. And all the ones that I saw today were, well, I saw a healthy combination of Ionia Shadow Isle, Mono Shadow Isle, and the new Piltover Zon Shadow Isle, which I believe only plays Mystic Shot. And I'm not actually sure where that deck popped up from. I'm sure that either some streamer played it or somebody hit Masters with it and it got big on Twitter. But I saw that like 4 or 5 times for the very first time today. So I'm sure something happened in the last 24 hours with that deck. And I guess that's like kind of the next step. And then Mystic Shots looked really good in the deck, to be honest.
I
just
saw
that extra bit of reach. The extra
killing
removal.
Mistwraiths for 2, honestly, is just like a lot of the fearsome units, except for exactly Wraithcaller, have 2 HP. So just using your spell mana, like sometimes it's hard when they just like slam a guy to get a Black Spear online quick enough to be able to interact with that. So having the Mystic Shot to just take pot shots at the 4 or 5 attack Mistwraiths is just worth it. I did also see that deck, and it actually True Shot barraged me on like turn 6, and I was like, oh.
I don't know about all that. But
yeah, I don't know about that.
True Shot barrage, but
yeah, I was like, oh, that's something. I took 3 to the face, 2 guys died, and I'm like, huh, well that's something. But yeah, I'm not sure.
You're in Diamond, so you're still playing against Master players from time to time. So like you're seeing the same stuff that I am, more or less. Something I think another problem though is that fearsome scales too well at every stage of the game. Like it shouldn't have been possible for me to make a deck that only contains fearsome units, and then like my one non-fearsome unit is Hecarim, who has Overwhelm. So it's basically the same thing.
Right.
I think Ladros and Rasa having fearsome is a problem. I think that they are the ones that should have fearsome, and then some of the early game stuff shouldn't have it. But the fact that like I can play a 1/1 turn 1 and it'll never have the opportunity to block at any stage except for like it can get overwhelmed by a Hecarim to reduce 1 damage. But the fact that like your early game has fearsome into like your late game has fearsome, and you're attacking with an 8 attack minion that halved my life, and I still can't block with my 2/2.
Yeah, you don't want to kill it. You have to kill it, and then when it dies, it just comes back, and it costs 8. Like you were saying, you want to increase the cost of that card. I don't think that's unreasonable at all. I think it's very efficient at closing out the game, especially when you have all these super powerful control tools in Shadow Isles that actually just end up being very aggressive tempo tools because of how efficient they are and at how good they are at being controlling when especially paired with aggressive creatures, which it just apparently has the monopoly on. I feel way more terrified about the aggression from Shadow Isles than I actually do about Jinx or Draven, because I know that I can run them out of cards, and then if I kill their Jinx, then I'm sitting pretty until like the Augmented Engineer or Augmented Experimenter comes down. And I have seen that deck maybe once or twice, and obviously Shadow Isles is just top of the ladder. Hit a lot of people hitting Masters of Shadow Isles. Number one deck on the ladder is Mono Shadow Isles, so I think it really does just speak to exactly how powerful that is right now. And
it just has too many tools across the board, especially like Glimpse Beyond, I think is a huge problem because it really lets your opponent trade tempo extremely efficiently, where it's like, oh, I took the spell mana thing really helps out aggro in this game because it's like, oops, it kind of rewards you for missing a land drop into the mid game, or like a tempo drop. I don't want to say land drop because it's like, all right, so like if I accidentally take like, let's say I don't draw my Arachnid Horror or an Elise, and then it's like, okay, I took turns 1 and 2 off. All of a sudden, I'm floating 3 spell mana for basically the rest of the game. That means the first time that my opponent goes to play like a medium costed spell to actually deal with one of my guys, oh look, I get to draw 2 cards. I neutral out. I get a pretty good tempo advantage because I spent less mana than they did. And then, oh look, I drew my Elise and Arachnid Horror that I didn't draw in the early game. I get to slam those down. I think that's another problem that Ladros being 8 mana kind of falls into, where if this were Hearthstone, 8 mana Ladros would be reasonable. But because of the nature of spell mana in this game and the fact that I get to play Ladros and then float 2 mana into the next turn, and then the next time I play Ladros, I have 4 mana banked because, you know, I'm on 10 mana. I play him for 8. I still have the 2 mana banked.
You're saying if you play him on like turn 10, is what you're saying?
Yeah. Like, I think he should cost 10 mana. It's a little bit too much to be able to float mana into the next turn with him as well, or just be able to play like another creature alongside it. It's just too aggressive. And he's coming down a little too early. Like, turn 8 is pretty early for me to be getting to 10 life when cards in this game that are, you know, high drops are so aggressively statted. My life total is hard capped at 20, which is a pretty low life total, I feel, for how big some of these things are and how much damage they can put out.
Right. So let's compare, for example, Ladros to Tryndamere, because Tryndamere is 9, if I recall, right?
Tryndamere is 8.
He is 8, right. So Tryndamere, Ladros, like, Ladros goes back to your hand. You need to play him again, but Tryndamere just levels up. He's a little bit weaker on the health side. He's only got 4 health instead of 6, but he does have Overwhelm, which is usually better than Fearsome when you have 8 attack, I would say.
Generally,
but he's a champion, so like, do you think that Tryndamere is a better card than Ladros currently? And like, he is a champion, so he should be, but is he?
Absolutely not. Ladros, best case, says enter, deal 10 damage.
Sure. Attack
for 8. That means Ladros can, at most, deal 18 damage the turn that he comes down. And if you have less than 18 life, he kills you.
If you have less than 18 life, he kills you. Yeah, I guess.
And Tryndamere at most can deal 8 damage. It's completely incomparable.
Right, but then Tryndamere gets to kill you on the next turn when he's a 9/9, right?
No, he doesn't. He gets to deal 17 damage across 2 turns.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that kind of says exactly what like the problem here is, right? Like, Ladros is just, it feels like it's better at ending the game than Tryndamere, and like Tryndamere is like the big win condition for this Freljord like ramp control deck, where he should just be like, he's the only unit they need to just kind of slam their hand on the table and say, I'm going to win the game now. I have afforded myself the time to play 8 mana to kill you. And then meanwhile, like, Ladros is just like, I do this way better than you. And like, if you kill Tryndamere twice, you're just like, poof, we got there. Or if you like, there's just a lot of different ways to actually deal with Tryndamere, I think. Once you get to that 8 mana stage in the game, but Ladros is just like the only way to deal with him from just like constantly coming down. Like, you actually just, it's so hard to get back ahead once the Ladros comes down. Like, if you're already behind on turn 8, it's just kind of game over.
One of the big problems is like, so if you Will of Ionia Tryndamere, you've completely stopped my turn. If you Will of Ionia Ladros, he's coming down next turn and dealing more damage to you, regardless of whether or not you let him attack. And Tryndamere, so you kill the first one, it levels up. Now every Tryndamere after that is just a 9/9 Overwhelm for 8. It doesn't have the revive passive anymore because it's already a leveled up champion. The second Ladros is coming down just as effective as the first one was, just as resilient. It's still going to go back to my hand when it dies.
Another
problem is that... Go ahead.
No, you first. I
was going to say... Shadow Isle is just doing everything too well across the board. The early game's too powerful. The late game's too powerful. Because, like, and that's very apparent by the fact that the number 1 deck on ladder currently is Mono Shadow Isle. You are not going to see any other mono faction deck hit master anytime soon. It can only be Shadow Isle. If you play Mono Freljord, your deck sucks. The Freljord early game is good at supporting another class. And then Tryndamere and She Who Wanders are like good late game cards, but She Who Wanders is so much more comparable to Ladros than Tryndamere is in terms of power level.
And they did just nerf Tryndamere, and they did just nerf She Who Wanders. So I think the problem, like, was Ladros even being played in the Freljord Shadow Isle second wave of beta? Did you see it?
I started playing. I asked a friend for a deck list. He sent it to me. I didn't play Ladros because we played 3 War Mother's Call because Deny really wasn't that popular. And I didn't see anybody else playing Ladros. I didn't know that card existed until the first time it got dropped in me in open beta.
I gotcha. Yeah, I that was something that I didn't even know existed until later on. I was playing Hecarim decks in the beta, but I was playing like with Deathmark and the 5/5 lifelink and Zed and stuff like that. So I was playing
all that nonsense.
For sure.
That stuff faded out really quickly.
Yeah,
that was the hotness for like 2 days, and then everybody was like, okay, it's just fearsome.
Yeah, you just don't have time to play Shark. Like, and then Hecarim is just dealing 10 by himself. Like, you absolutely just don't need to. And then Deny does exist, and then Glimpse Beyond exists. So if you go to Deathmark something and they Glimpse Beyond it, you're just like,
yeah, the Deathmark stuff was just, it was too cheeky. There were so many ways to outplay it.
Every single deck, I think, on ladder is either playing Deny or Glimpse Beyond. The only ones that aren't are like Frel Noxus and then some like Piltover Freljord. That's pretty much it.
Hold on. I was playing Piltover Noxus through most of Diamonds, and I didn't play either of those cards. And I was doing fine.
Yeah, you would just kill your own guys. You like Culling Strike your own guy to beat it. Like, there was just ways to do it, and I just don't think it was pretty cool when like nobody really had a handle on the meta, but now people are, on Twitter every day figuring out what's going on. So it's definitely changed a lot. But
I think that's enough about Shadow Isle at the moment, though.
Yeah, 20 minutes of Shadow Isle, no problem. But let's go ahead and talk about what other decks are good, because there was a Mobalytics tier list that did come out, and they actually put 3 decks in the S tier. At the top, they put Fearsome Midrange, which is what we've been talking about with the Elise, the Hecarim, the Mistwraith, the Wraithcaller, Deny is back up, a little bit of Shadow Assassin, and then, of course, Rasa and Ladros. But also in the top S tier, you've got Dawn Spiders, which is more Elise stuff, and it's still going to do some Wraithcaller stuff most of the time, but instead of doing Shadow Assassin Deny from Ionia, it does stuff like Dawn Speakers and back-to-back from Demacia. And then the final one is the Elusive problem, so when you're not just getting Fearsome out of the game, I think Elusive is a bit more resilient at ending. It's really Hecarim, I think, that carries the Fearsome deck. But when you are just doing the Elusive stuff, getting some big Elusive guys out and then just swinging in the air, basically, is super, super good. And then Demacia has the best buffs to support that in terms of damage and also just keeping your guys alive. So that's obviously the case. But then when you look at these 3 S tier decks, you've got Shadow Isles, Demacia, and Ionia. So what's going on with Freljord, Noxus, Piltover? I think they're very viable classes, but they're not S tier according to Mobalytics, which I believe is using an algorithm of what people are actually playing and what's having the most success in terms of win rate. So what's got Demacia and Ionia going that is making the other classes fall behind?
I think it's just so the removal in Noxus for the most part kind of gets beaten out by either, first of all, just Deny.
I would even say Glimpse Beyond, yeah.
You're generally just trading 3 mana for 3 mana on the Deny versus the removal out of Noxus, and like Noxian Guillotine can be hard to proc. The Culling Strike just gets beat out by buff spells out of Demacia. It's just all very efficient, very situational removal, and the second you don't find yourself in the proper situation, your deck folds.
Mm-hmm.
And then the aggro out of Noxus just isn't that great. We saw Noxus Spiders as one of the very early decks in the ladder, where you just kind of play Elise to like get out an early game, get your opponent down to 10 life, slam down a Darius, and just swing out. And people have quickly found out that as a 6-mana champion, Darius is incomparable to Hecarim.
Yeah.
You might as well just play a Hecarim deck.
Yeah, I mean, like, if you want to... Darius is like, I will deal 10 damage if my opponent is at 10 or less. And Hecarim is just like, I will deal 10 damage. Also, I have more health than you. Like, and you don't even have to evolve the Hecarim. Like, have you ever evolved the Hecarim in these Shadow Isle decks?
I've never seen it happen.
Yeah.
The game ends before it happens.
I used to do that all the time when I was playing Sharks and stuff, but now it's just like, you need to attack with Hecarim 4 times because you play... you don't even play other ephemeral guys. If you Mark of the Isles like mid combat, does Hecarim get a proc, or do you need to Mark of the Isles before? Exactly. So you're just never actually leveling this Hecarim, and he's still just insane. If you have gotten
to a point where you have attacked with Hecarim 4 times and you haven't won the game, you should lose, and instead you get a 5/7 that summons 2 5/2s. You get rewarded.
Yeah, that's definitely a little bit silly. So Demacia, of course, is the main card I think that is present in both the Dawn Spiders deck and the Elusive Burn is back-to-back. 5 mana, 2 guys get a temporary +3/+3, and that is back-to-back breaking, in my opinion, most of the time, just in terms of You're usually doing it when you're pushing damage, but it does feel like a card I can play around a little bit. Where as long as you're trying to kill things on your own turn and not letting them get the buff on their turn plus damage, it's the same kind of thing with Mark of the Isles. I don't feel like the Demacia stuff is as frustrating as the actual Shadow Isles and Ionia stuff, or just like the elusives and the fearsome. I think that the buffs Demacia gives are a lot more fair. I think we're just seeing the Demacia up in the S tier, so to speak, because it is being paired with, it does pair best with the aggressive, game-ending, fearsome, and elusive stuff.
Yeah, Demacia is great for ladder because you get to play a lot of games very quickly, but if you were to like say you were going to like a Grand Prix for this or something and you were going to play 15 rounds, I think it would be a little on the dangerous side to take a Demacia deck, because you do want to play, like, they have the most effective buff spells, but the problem with decks like that is just you are generally relying on a single threat or two to carry you through the game, and then drawing the proper amount of buff spells, still having things that will play. So I think that I'm actually very surprised to see Dawn Spiders on here. I'm not surprised to see Elusive, because if I play a combat trick and then you try to kill my guy, I have Deny on backup. But Dawn Spiders doesn't have that. If I play a buff spell on a guy and then you either Vengeance or Will of Ionia it, I just lose out on a lot of value. And I think that it's not a very consistent kind of deck. I think that you're definitely going to have games where your pump spells line up in the wrong order, or you just see too many guys and no buffs, and maybe you can get around it because your opponent is still playing around back to back even though you don't have it. But the big card that I actually think is kind of carrying the Demacia class lately is Purify. This is a card that this is a card that I really liked when I initially kind of saw the meta start to develop, and I was like, okay, as elusive.
Which one's Purify again? That's the remove all keywords
from a follower.
It also like removes any buffs on the card, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So it removes any buffs, and it removes elusive, which is, it's actually started to pick up a lot of play in the elusive Demacia decks as well. Just so like, I have a flyer. Okay, now you don't have a flyer. Mine gets to go through. Like, you already committed a buff spell with yours to try to uptrade onto mine, and now like you lose everything. And that's a card that I really like. But I'm just completely bewildered to see Dawn Spiders in S tier.
Yeah, I do think that the top of the A tier right now is mid-range Frostbite, and I think that this deck has all the tools to beat what the elusive and the fearsome decks are doing, right? Like, you've got anti-aggro, you've got challenger guys, you've got Legion Drummer to give quick attack to your challenger guys, you've got the aggressive one-cost Frostbite to be used on anything with 3 health or less that can just like be essentially used as a one-mana removal spell when you're using it in conjunction with blockers or with your challengers. So I think everything that this deck has going on, you've got the late game power of Avaros and Hearthguard and Trifarian Assessor, so you've got buffing your deck, card draw, you just steamroll through turns 5, 6, and 7. But the problem...
One sec, you're getting ahead of yourself. I want to back up a little bit because we didn't talk about why Freljord and Piltover didn't make it.
I'm getting there. So like, okay. I'm saying all of this happens, but the deck just like feels just a hinge too fair compared to what the Shadow Isles and stuff are doing, right? Because it is stuff like all of your 2-drops and your 3-drops, your Rhymefang Wolf and your Avaros and Marksman, your Legion Drummond, your Iceveil Archer, they've all got 3 attack. So you can kind of set up these frosty boards, you can try and like get to your killing your opponent, and then they just like play a Frenzied Skitterer and push 8 damage on turn 4. And you're like, that felt kind of bad. Your removal is all single target, and you are, even though you're using very efficient tempo plays with like Brittle Steel and Frostbite and using challengers to kind of run into the guys, Glimpse Beyond is a problem. Everything dies to Black Spear, your champion dies to Black Spear, so you do kind of lose out in the long run. And then when you look at the Elise, when you look at the Wraith Caller, like a lot of the stuff that the Fearsome Midrange and especially the Dawn Spiders is doing is they're making multiple guys. And you can't start freezing multiple guys until you get to Harsh Winds mana, and then you're committing a lot. And then even double freezing is like just being used to prevent lethal. It feels like very early in the Frostbite midrange games that you're actually losing. So I do think that's kind of where once maybe the Shadow Isles and the Ionia get put in check a little bit by potential nerfs, like do you think that midrange Frostbite just becomes the number one, or do you think that currently midrange Frostbite is just like preying on those decks so well when it draws well that maybe like the Piltover finally starts popping up once the oppressiveness of Fearsome and Elusive kind of comes down?
I think Noxus Ash sucks.
I think you're wrong and you're a doo-doo head. How about that? Ending stream. End of the podcast, guys. This was a terrible idea. My brother is mentally challenged and I'm upset.
I do not think the deck is very good. I think that it makes sense that we're not seeing Piltover in S tier because the class is just hard to play.
Sure.
Jinx Draven is like a decent aggro deck, but it's not the best aggro deck, and that's not going to carry an entire class. And then like Heimerdinger and Ezreal are just kind of hard to play. And I can understand people not wanting to put like 20, 30 games into it before you actually start like climbing and seeing results with it. So I understand Piltover not being there. Noxus we already touched on, and then Freljord I think just has too many -1s and not enough ways to actually accrue advantage. You generally like this deck relies on using challenger units and then frostbite effects to get combat effectiveness and advantage out of, which is very hard in decks like Demacia where they just play a pump spell, especially when like you really want to greed for the value and like up trade. Like you want to like attack a 5/1
You
into
have
a
to
5/5.
almost, right?
Exactly.
Otherwise,
so, like,
you're
you attack...
completely relying on a Trifarian Assessor to just draw 3 cards in the mid game, which can sometimes
like,
work, and then sometimes you just don't draw it, and you just like everything is awful.
I'll attack my 5/1 into like your 2/3. Your
right. But it's your
like a 5/5.
It's your 2 mana 5/1. So that's what's so good about it, right? Is you have the potential to trade that card into a Rasa and feel super good, or you can trade with their 3/2, and that's still fine because you paid 2 mana for their 2 mana, and that's just like good. But it does feel like
the problem is when you're like trying to up trade, and it's like okay, well, like I need to get more health off the board. Or let's say a 3/2 is a better example then for what we're going. So let's say we want to attack my 3/2 into your like 4/4, right? Just as an example. And then it's like, okay, well, I have to use a frostbite effect. Well, I guess I'd have to kill it anyway. So, like a 2/3. Let's say Kinku Lifeblade. I'm attacking into your Kinku Lifeblade with a 3/2 wolf. And I want to kill it, and I want my 3/2 to survive so that I can continue to pick off your elusive guys. I'm going to play my freeze effect because I have to, and all of a sudden you respond with back-to-back, and I get absolutely blown out because I just took a -2.
Right. So some of the time you just have to go for the trade. I think that's like the optimal way to play the deck, and that's probably the deck that I've put the most hours on personally is Freljord Noxus, and I'm glad it's finally started seeing traction, but also sad because it's kind of my baby.
I'm very happy it started seeing traction. It made my climb a lot easier.
Well, yeah, because you started playing Heimerdinger, and then it's like I've got like 8 or no, you've got
Heimerdinger is broken.
11 freeze effects in your deck, and then all of a sudden your opponent doesn't play any minions until like turn 5, and then they play like 7 minions, and they're all elusive, and you're like, this is awful, and I hate this. Like only as obnoxious as the elusive deck is, only Heimerdinger could just play 4 elusive 3/1s on turn 6, and it's just like let's just happen. This is nonsense.
But yeah, I think Freljord as a whole just like has to play a little bit too greedily, can get punished a little bit too easily, and doesn't have the card advantage engine to break its way into S tier currently. I think I'm not necessarily certain that like they're gonna buff anything out of the 3 lower classes. I think they're gonna probably stick to nerfs and maybe some minor adjustments on some cards for this first balance patch. I'd be a little surprised to like see some actual like hard buffs across some classes.
I could see some like we were talking about earlier. I could see some cards in other classes that are 2 power being bumped to 3 power, just to maybe have that be the combat to fearsome.
I'm not even sure I would call that a buff though. I think I would just call that a nerf to fearsome.
That's fair. So let's like throw it a hypothetical, right? Let's say that there was a Hearthstone or a Legends of Runeterra Grand Prix this weekend, right? So obviously Shadow Isles is the best ladder deck. It's efficient. It's got a high win rate. Do you think that what would be a good tournament deck? Because you can go into a tournament and expect the vast majority of people to play Shadow Isles or some variant of it. Like, would you like what deck would you say counters it more than anything?
So I was playing Ionia Heimerdinger today, and that's what I got.
You're already wrong because you didn't say Frel Noxus, but I want you to continue so I can rebut you later. Carry on.
And I thought the deck would have a bad fearsome matchup, and that I would just kind of hope to avoid it. And then I just started beating pretty much every fearsome player that I ran into. And a big part of that was just Will of Ioniaing Hecarim on 6, but that's not the point. The point is, I feel like that deck has a lot of good matchups across the board. And the thing that kind of surprised me initially is that the deck that I saw, I think it was Mogwai's list, played Get Excited, or 3 Get Excited and 3 Rummage, and absolutely no things that like create mushrooms or fleeting cards in order for you to discard off of free advantage.
Right.
And it kind of felt like you play cards that are just good in certain matchups and are terrible in others, and then you just discard them in the terrible matchups.
Yeah.
So I think in a Grand Prix, that's the kind of deck that I would want to take into like a Legends of Runeterra Grand Prix. I want something that like has the tools to beat every deck, and then the ability to get rid of my bad cards in certain matchups. And I think that would be Ionia Karma Heimerdinger.
Karma Heimerdinger. All right.
Yeah.
I did also see Mogwai has been like a big fan of Heimerdinger overall. I saw his Draven Heimerdinger where he was using Draven to create axes to funnel through rummages and stuff. And it did feel like a little bit more aggressive, but you're still just kind of playing Heimer on 5 and then doing Heimerdinger things. But the Noxus removal, I've said for a long time that I feel like the Noxus removal is actually just like should be the best removal in the game, but it's just the most interactable removal in the game. So I've kind of changed that opinion as we've gone through the weeks of beta so far. Like Whirling Death just should be insane, but then they just like kill your guy or Will of Ionia it or something, and then like it just doesn't matter anymore. I think Noxie and Guillotine should be insane, but it just takes too long to get online, and by the later stages in the game, most decks are just like fighting to keep cards that you can't actually get a high value like double or triple Noxie and Guillotine off. And then there's
I think
one
Noxie
more,
and
Culling
Guillotine.
Strike. How do you feel about Culling Strike? I think Culling Strike's really good against Piltover and almost makes it hard for Piltover to be a good deck.
Calling Strike is just, there are too many buff spells in the format for Calling Strike to be good right now.
That's why you play it in a Frostbite deck, and then everything. Because like
anyway,
anyway,
I was gonna say, Noxie and Guillotine like would be a lot better in any other card game where you could kind of like prep something, because the way that it's worded is destroy like target damaged unit. So like theoretically, I could target a non-damaged unit and then like respond with Death Lotus, and then Death Lotus resolves first, deals one to everything, then Noxie and Guillotine resolves and does it. But that's not how Legends of Runeterra works, because of the way that the priority sequencing works in Legends of Runeterra, and the fact that there is no priority sequence after no blockers are declared, and I can't like play something, you pass, I play something again. So like I can't, go to like you go to combat, I Death Lotus, you don't do anything, I let Death Lotus resolve, and then I Noxie and Guillotine. You can't do that in Legends of Runeterra. You could do that in Magic the Gathering or Force of Will or any other physical card game, but because that's not the way it works here, it makes the Noxus removal look a lot better on paper than it actually is.
Right. No, I can agree with that. Just in general, like I've felt like Whirling Death has sometimes gotten bopped by a whole bunch of stuff. I think Calling Strike has been my favorite, but again, it's specifically paired with the Freljord where you have the Frostbite. So you can like go to Frostbite something, and then because almost every single buff in the game that matters is +3/+3, after you Frostbite something, if they buff it, you can still Culling Strike it, or they can't buff it out of Culling Strike range basically, and that's the only thing. I've been incredibly underwhelmed by how Whirling Death performed, and I think what really turned me off to Whirling Death was actually elusive, because against Noxus, when you're an elusive deck, you just only swing with your elusive guys, and then you can't get anything into combat, and then but at the same time, we have seen Demacia Ionia do very well. We've seen a couple Fiora Karma decks do very well. And there was a deck that got Masters playing 3 copies of Judgment, which I think is kind of insane, but apparently worked out. Like, have you seen that at all? Like, what's your opinion on Judgment as a card, and especially 3 of? And he said that it beat Mistwraiths. And then it's a function of the deck's somewhat cutting Deny, because it's.
Are you talking about the River Shaper deck?
I think it's River Shaper.
That's on the tier list.
Is it on the tier list?
Yes,
I haven't seen it in the wild, so I'm curious to see if you've seen something.
Tier, it is River Shaper Fiora.
Aha. So have you seen the Judgment Fiora? The deck that I'm thinking of played Karma. Like, is that doing things better than elusive Demacia Ionia? Like, what's the catch here?
So the catch here is that you have kind of a better late game, and you have better tools to like. So basically, what the deck does is it wants to play with singular threat and then put a bunch of buffs into it. And River Shaper is a great card for that, because it will constantly replace
the cards that you're drawing, right?
Exactly, yeah. So like I back-to-back it, oh look, I drew another back-to-back, this is great. And then it also plays Kinku Lifeblade, and I think Kinku Lifeblade is kind of like the best card in the elusive decks, because it's what lets you outrace Fearsome.
Yeah, for sure.
And I don't know if you've played Fearsome or elusive buff yourself.
I've played a decent amount of Fearsome, yeah.
And playing the mirror, it just feels like you're playing solitaire with your opponent, and it's like, okay, well, both of us are just going to sit here and see how much damage we can push out. And the difference is Fearsome has more early damage, but
then they have Lifeblade.
Elusive has Kinku Lifeblade.
Right.
And Kinku Lifeblade will just like shore that up. So the River Shaper Fiora decks are just kind of like, they can win with Fiora, or they could just like buff a guy into oblivion and blast you with it. And if it's River Shaper, then they're getting advantage off of it. If it's Kinku Lifeblade, then they're not dying anytime soon. And Judgment just pairs so well with these cards. If you Judgment a River Shaper and kill 5 units, you will draw 5 cards.
Yeah, even if you don't kill 5 units, if you just hit 5 units, you're just drawing 5 cards.
So people, I think this list that they have listed here, I don't know if you know that you can click on these and it'll show you the list.
Yeah, I can see the whole thing that they got going on.
And it will, so basically, like, this deck it's a very value game plan. You pump a bunch of buffs into one guy, and then Karma's in there because, if you make it to the late game, double buffing something's even better.
Right. And the only elusive guys you're playing are Shadow Assassin and Lifeblade. You're not playing the Ionian Mentors. You're not playing the Conspirators. You're not playing...
No, you're definitely not an aggro deck like that. You're definitely just, like, playing something that can, like, play one unit and win with it, which is why I hated the Fiora Shen decks of old. Like, I would just play decks like this, and I would just draw all my buff spells, and I was like, this is terrible. I never want to play anything like this again. So I never actually picked up this deck myself, but it is something that I'm a little familiar with because I have friends that play it. I know it was one of the earlier decks to hit Masters because I believe Tides of Time is the one that built this deck. And then people have kind of like, tweaked it a little bit and hit Masters with it again. I know someone is up to 3 Judgment, and I can understand that, especially with the Fearsome deck starting to kind of phase out of Ionia. they just get hard punished by Judgment.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that Standalone is also like a decently good card when you build a deck like this. I've seen it a lot more personally on Zed. So I haven't seen the Karma as much. I've seen Fiora Zed, and then it's like that deck almost always goes turn 1 pass, turn 2 pass, Fiora or Zed on 3, and then Standalone. Or Shadow Assassin, and then it's just like, I know they have Standalone, they've got back-to-back. They just have a lot of different buff effects that get very problematic. And like you said, Kinku Lifeblade, just Lifesteal in general is just such a solid mechanic with the way that combat works in this game, because it feels like once you start getting like turn 5, turn 6, turn 7, you're really just looking at combat math in the sense of, okay, how many turns can I kill my opponent, and in how many turns can my opponent kill me? And then you need to decide if you're going to be the beatdown and you need to like push an extra attack through, or if you need to be more value oriented and try and get a control of the board that way, while also thinking about cards to play around like Black Spear and Rasa or Judgment and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think one of the problems is I'd actually I've been thinking about how they can nerf elusive, and initially I thought that maybe they'll just do some stat nerfs on every elusive unit across the board. But I think what they actually should probably do is end up. I'm a little iffy on like removing elusive from some units and then like buffing their stats so that like they're still a playable card, because like the less elusive units there are in the pool, the better the elusive units that there still are. But I think having lifesteal and elusive is a little bit much, because if I'm not playing it's very possible that I'm just not playing any like a faction that has access to elusive units, and then all of a sudden I'm just playing like 2 life down the entire game. God forbid you get to stand alone a Kinku Lifeblade. Now you have 5 life that you get every turn that I can do nothing about, and God forbid you block with it at some point, and now my combat math is even more thrown off, and you're in the same faction as Deny. So it's hard to use a removal spell on it, and I can't kill it with combat. So what am I supposed to do about this 9/9 Kinku Lifeblade?
You seem very upset about it's an 8/9 Kinku usually, so it's not.
I've died to it a few times. So
no, I get you. One thing that I had is also just like where lifesteal is in the game. So if you could just like search lifesteal, it's like Ionia, Demacia, Shadow Isles. And part of this bothers me because Vladimir and like all of his Crimson Aristocrats and all of that nonsense is in Noxus, and then the vampires just have no lifesteal whatsoever. And I'm like,
they didn't want to be stereotypical.
From a
they
flavor
were like,
element, I can understand
sometimes
this.
Vampires just hurt people. Sometimes they don't get anything out of it.
Like Twilight, I understand. I don't think Vladimir's a Twilight vampire, but all right.
No, Vladimir kills people to get bigger. He doesn't lifesteal off of it. He's just getting stronger. I mean, sure, he does in League of Legends. That man gets big as hell. But not in Legends of Runeterra. He just gets bigger.
So I get that Noxus is supposed to be the aggressive element, aggressive faction. It's not supposed to have lifesteal. It's kind of, and I think part of the reason for that is that it's pretty obnoxious when an aggro deck gets access to lifesteal. So then why does Kinku Lifeblade get to be this aggressive, like...
I don't think it was intended to be an aggressive card.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about like aggro...
Looking at its stat line, like...
Yeah, it's not.
I wouldn't be surprised
if they
looked at this.
2/3. Like, what's the...
I would not be surprised if you told me that the dev team in testing like looked at Kinku Lifeblade and went, "This card's unplayable." It's like pack filler, because it's one of the very few cards in this game that doesn't actually have like text on it. It's just like 2 keywords, and it's one of the best cards in the game.
It's one of those things that's like a Timmy card, right? Like it's like you say this in any other game. You're like, "Oh my goodness, I take this card, and if I buff it like 2 times, then I'm doing this broken thing." And then any player that's ever like gone to school before just walks up and says, "This is vulnerable to removal," and then walks away and takes your lunchbox with them. And that's just like been the norm for card games for forever. But then because damage sticks, because it flies, and flying is super good in this game, and combat is hard to do. It's a bit more like Magic oriented, like it's actually good. We don't have the kind of removal that a game like Magic the Gathering has, but we do have the power level of permanence. When something can get on the field, it's difficult to interact with unless you're playing very specific things. And because you have access to Deny, that limits a lot of the most useful tools. So then you're limited to pretty much exactly Challenger. And there are not a lot of good Challenger units in the game, because Challenger is a very, very good mechanic. And I think they appropriately balance Challenger. I think Elusive felt appropriately balanced until you realize how good buffing things actually is in this game. And it feels like Fearsome just has the best control tools and ends up being a good tempo deck on top of being a good aggro deck. So
yeah, Fearsome just has like too many tools to take it into the late game and then beat you, and then Elusive just has too many tools to like take you to the late game and become unkillable, because they have like 2 Kinku Lifeblades out. You can't trade with any other guys. A lot of the removal in this game is damage based, so like the buff spells feel even better.
A lot of
Especially,
the later stages of the game can, if you're not trading very aggressively, it can very much end up that you're taking like 10 plus damage in a turn on like turn 7, turn 8, just because of how the life caps at 20, how wide boards can get, and then how uninteractive some boards can actually be.
and that's a big problem that I have with the Freljord Noxus deck is that there's no life gain in the deck. You like your life total is extremely stagnant.
Because the
So if you just
vampires
eat-
don't have life steal.
So if you just eat like 10 damage on turn 4 because your opponent went like Mist Caller, Wraith Caller, Mist Caller, and then it's like, okay, well I have 10 life, you know, I'll try to win the game, and then like I start dropping Ladros 3 turns later, and it's like, okay, well like now I'm down to 5. Oh look, I killed Ladros. I'm down to 2. Like Ladros will kill you in 4 turns.
You just
And then you
frostbite
only
it when
get
it
2
attacks
attack
and you
turns out of
leave it
this.
there. You frostbite it when it attacks and you leave it there. But
I'm gonna glimpse beyond it.
I'm gonna cry because it's happened. And just there's nothing you can do about it. It feels like. No, I completely agree. Just pretty much, yeah. I think that Noxus kind of got the short end of the stick. I think the Freljord nerfs really hurt, and that kind of made Shadow Isles pop up definitely as like the aggressive stuff. Like the control tools just aren't there. Ramping just isn't good because you die too fast, and flyers are good. It's like, yeah, and that's
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Anything else we want to talk about before we get out of here?
Do you have anything else? I don't know. I just kind of had like the patch or the like flavor of the month decks that we had seen from like the beginning up until now, and where I think the meta is gonna like go from here. But it really just kind of depends on how this patch ends up shaking out, because initially we saw Noxus Spiders was like the big deck of like opening weekend because it was like the first deck to hit Masters.
Sure.
Then we got into, I believe it was Elusives was like the next big thing to come up.
Yeah.
People had like finally kind of nailed down the Elusive Demacia deck and like all the buff spells and stuff, figured out the right ratios, and they were like, okay, this is a good deck. Then we saw Fearsome come up. Then we saw Fearsome switch to Mono Shadow Isle. And then the Ezreal Frostbite deck has been like chilling. It's been like kind of the popular, like the new popular, like, okay, maybe this can beat all the meta decks kind of thing. But the deck still feels really inconsistent. I think that Frostbite Ezreal is still in like its kind of early stages. I'm not even necessarily sure that like Frostbite Ezreal is going to, like, they might end up just changing factions. But I do think some kind of Ezreal deck is like still very, very good. I think that's a strategy that needs a little bit more time to craft and wasn't something as so like Heimerdinger coming into open beta. We knew that like Heimerdinger was good. We just knew it was going to take time to figure out.
Yeah.
And everybody knew that. And I think Ezreal is kind of the same thing. It's going to take a little bit of time to figure out, but nobody was as excited for Ezreal as they were for Heimerdinger. So nobody was on it as early. And I think in another like week or two, we're going to like kind of have those Ezreal decks figured out, and then we can complain about it on Reddit.
I'm very excited to complain about it on Reddit. That is for sure. Yeah, in terms of what I think is kind of like sleeping in the woodworks, obviously I've talked extensively about Freljord Noxus, other things. I actually think that once the oppressive nature of the fearsome elusive aggro stuff, and we can kind of look towards traditional aggro as maybe being a viable option, I think Lucian is actually super powerful. And I've kind of messed around with him. I think like a Lucian Noxus deck might be something that gets kind of spooky. I think once if we do see like Shadow Isle nerfs, right, and then people feel a bit more comfortable playing more mid-range stuff, stuff like Heimerdinger, stuff like Ashe, stuff like even slower stuff, I think that Lucian can kind of mount and then say, okay, Lucian on 2, Senna on 3 is just actually kind of hard to deal with some of the time because you have quick attack, because you have double attack.
Yeah, because of how combat works in this game and how good. Because of how combat works, buffs are very good.
Yeah.
And because buffs are very good, first strike is very good. Because like I'll attack with my Lucian, and you're like, okay, like I'll throw this blocker under it and use a removal spell. Then it's like, okay, well, like I buff it out of range. I don't get killed by your removal spell, and now I just get to eat your guy because I have first strike. And because you don't get to attack into my guys unless you have Challenger, but you know, Challenger guys tend to be a little understated. Yeah. A lot of them have to attack so they can deal with the Lucian, but once I upgrade the Lucian, then like it's game over, baby. Plus, like if I have a Senna on field, then you don't want to kill my Lucian because then I'm gonna have a 5/3 with double, or I think a 5/3 with double strike.
I have like a personal goal of building this Demacia Noxus deck and then just leveling up a Senna and then just putting the +3/+0 overwhelm spell on it. I just want to kill someone from like 15 on like turn 5 with that spell. That's my goal. But I think that's got something there, but it's just been completely overshadowed by the more degenerate or like unfair feeling aggro decks than just like, here's my 2 1-on-1, here's my 5/2 on 2, here's my Senna on 3, here's my Lucian on 4 kind of stuff, you know?
Yeah, I think Lucian will be good once we get some nerfs to the other stuff. Quick question though, is Senna the only champion in League of Legends that is not a champion in Legends of Runeterra and is actually a card?
As far as I know.
That's because when Legends of Runeterra had their first open weekend, I don't think Senna was a champion in League of Legends yet.
That is correct. Yes.
I think she existed in the lore and then like came out afterwards. So it's a little weird to see
you're
that
forgetting
now.
there is one other like character in Legends of Runeterra that is not yet a champion in League of Legends, but will be.
Who is that?
It's Cytherea of Cloudfield.
Oh my god.
Cytherea the Bold, if you will. It'll happen. We all believe. Did I look the wrong? I looked the wrong way.
Oh my god.
I failed on one thing. I think that is gonna be it for us, though. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. Once again, I am Ryan Effin Miles,
and I am Boulevard, the tax evader.
and we will see you guys next week, hopefully with a patch rundown. So thanks for watching, everyone. Till next time.